What up, Internet? It's your host, Xero. Tonight I'm here to tell you a spooky story about the Safari Zone. So what's the Safari Zone, you ask? Well, it's not a term that I coined, but I think it's an apt description for what we do, which basically boils down to digital voyeurism. But I don't really think it's limited to digital. It's just anytime you're out there in the world, using your eyeballs and your brain and looking and seeing what you can see, what's out there, what's public, what, people don't want you to see, but yet aren't actively, trying to stop you or are doing a terrible job at stopping you from seeing. For me lately, that's open web cameras that don't have usernames and passwords on them, scraping public data on endpoints like Pastebin, and stuff like that. So when I was younger, we were really into urbex, which is urban exploration, but we lived in rural Ohio and West Virginia, so there wasn't a lot of urban landscape for us to be checking out. So for us, it was really like abandoned hospitals and factories, train tunnels, and stuff like that. The old lye factory had this like great big mountain of lye in the back of it, and like you had to be careful because here was lye. But you could climb up the scaffold on the back and get to the second half of the building, and it was like this big flat open area where you could tell where the second floor should have been. And there was great big holes. Some of them were like for machines for, I assume, like loading and processing lye. Other ones were just holes from decay and disuse from all the time. We used to take all kinds of photos there. I had a digital camera that wrote to floppy disks. We would go there all day and fill up 5 floppy disks and take 25 photos. You don't believe me, but I literally still have all of these old floppy disks of the photos. The place we're going to talk about is the Haunted Hospital in Weirton, West Virginia, which, RIP, they finally did tear it down. But for years it was still standing. They condemned it because of asbestos, but they didn't have the funds to actually tear it down. And it was right at the end of a community's cul-de-sac. And it was like a big wide cul-de-sac, but the hospital was set a little bit further back from the end of it, but the entrance was still there, but overgrown. The hospital's parking lot and all that stuff was basically gone. But the people who lived there, it was like a popular walking trail to sort of circle all the way back around the backside of the hospital. They boarded up the whole front entrance or whatever, but they didn't around back. And it had these great big stone steps that led down halfway to a sub-level, not quite a basement, but slightly underground. Those places are always colder, but in the middle of the summertime, which granted, West Virginia doesn't have the hottest summers, but 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're, 200 yards away, and you can already start to see your breath from a place. It's a little creepy, You go down into those steps, and it's just like a big entryway that's totally destroyed with the elements, graffiti, animals. You go off to the left and you can see where the morgue was. Some of the slabs are pulled out. Some of the doors are off their hinges. There's a little staircase in the back that Zach and I climbed down the one time. And it was just like a nightmare hellscape down there. It was all filled with water. It looked like something out of Silent Evil. I mean, Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Anyways, yeah, it was pretty dangerous. Probably snakes and stuff down there, so we didn't go. But all kinds of crazy twisted metal sticking up out of black water down there. None of my photos took out, of course, down there. But what were we doing there besides taking photos? I have no idea what we possibly could have been doing there. Before I turned 18, I did a lot of that type of thing. But, now I could get in a lot of trouble, so I keep it on the canvas. But we always thought that going to abandoned places and stuff like that and painting on the inside made a lot more sense, you know what I mean? We weren't destroying public property, we weren't destroying, something people saw. We were inside, having fun. But man, all kinds of creepy stuff happened in there. We never saw any other people but us in there. We saw some birds sometimes, you'd walk into a place and a pigeon there would flutter away and kind of startle you. That's not what I'm talking about. You'd be walking down a hallway and you'd see a room on your right that's just destroyed with trash and garbage and stuff like that. You walk down to the other end of the hallway and you turn around, like not even 2 minutes later, you come back and the room is completely empty. Like the paint on the walls just isn't there. Just it's gone. Everything's just empty. You know, we would go to places, things would move around all of the time. But excuse me, one time we were there, we got a little ballsy, and we climbed all the way up onto the roof, and it's beautiful. You can see all of Weirton, and like it's because the hospital's on the hillside, and it was a great view. And Nick and I climbed down the front, and we started painting on the front of the hospital, which was stupid. And somebody called the cops, and so we, ran into the place or whatever, and I fell into this box, and it had hazardous written on the outside of the box, and I was so paranoid that I'd fallen into a box of asbestos or something like that. We were running around the hospital, freaking out in the dark. We were trying to like hold out so the cops, wouldn't catch us, and we did, and we stayed there all the way until it got dark. We heard dogs barking, and we thought we saw specters and people running around in there, but I don't have any evidence that the cops ever entered the building or whatever, but we swore we saw all kinds of people that weren't us in there in that moment with the adrenaline, your heart pumping, and all that fear. And like we stayed there a long time, and we were trying not to use flashlights because we were trying to keep it low key. We weren't trying to get caught, but Zach had one, and like we would be in a room and we'd turn the light on because there was a room without windows or whatever, and we'd be in a place we thought was okay, and we'd look around and we'd be like, what's all this stuff in here? And then it would just fall out of the nothing, and of course we'd go off running, freaking out or whatever. We eventually left or whatever, and never went back to the haunted hospital again. I actually think that was probably the last time I painted in public too, to be honest with you. The Safari Zone nowadays, I'm really into scraping pastebin. If you don't know pastebin.com is just a website where you can share text. You can do it anonymously, you can do it with the API key with the username and password if you want. I have an API key and I scrape the crap out of it, but I've done it without an API key too. And the speed of the data is really slow. You really don't need a key to get everything on there. Like even if you miss something hot that gets nerfed or nuked, you can find a double of it. That stuff always pops up. And the Pastebin staff is awful with how they moderate it. Like people like me, I scan it for a legit work need. I'm looking for the names of my clients and stuff like that, for breaches and stuff like that, to make sure, I'm protecting them and their security. But like, if I see a dump that has passwords that have, one of my clients' name in it, and I report it to Pastebin, as a paid user, I expect them to just, kind of delete that stuff. They don't. They flag it for some amount of time. So many people have to click on it. I don't know how it works, but I don't care. I'm pro freedom of information and all that, but it just seems like a weird policy. Another good one is GitHub. They have a similar service, gist.github.com. You do need an API key, but anybody can get a GitHub username for that. It's fun to scrape that too. It's like a fire hose of data. They've been getting better at their moderation policy. They've finally put some rules in place that make it harder for you to upload data that you shouldn't. But people still do. You find a lot of keys in the GitHub Gist's API keys to services, AWS, stuff like that. Authentication tokens. Another one's Google Dorks. Hermit really just turned me onto that. If you don't follow Acmage on Twitter, you should. But she blows me away with some of these Google Dorks that she comes up with. If you go to the official list, if you've never done it before, just do the first couple pages of them. You'll see how fun they are and how powerful they are. If you learn Google's sort of like domain-specific language, the queries are pretty simple. Like show me the text begin ID RSA. In text, like show me every RSA key Google has indexed or whatever. There's all kinds of things like that. You could do that anywhere though. It's not just GitHub or not just Google. You could do it on GitHub. You can do it on any kind of things. So what do you do once you got this data, right? So if you're scraping, I got turned on to a tool called Yara. And Yara lets you do all kinds of analysis and heuristic and stuff like that on the data. So you can like automatically set up tons of preset rules for things. Kevin the Hermit originally started the Paste Hunter project. It's taken over by a friend of mine, Plasmas. You should definitely check that out because it helps scraping so much by just using a tool that's pre-set up. It already knows how all the logic works. But Kevin the Hermit, not to be confused with the other hermit, his rules for Yara are really interesting, and he has some really great ones to get you started and get you thinking about the ways you can write cool Yara rules to find, malware, to find bin files, to find certain headers for certain types of things that you're liking, and you're wanting to find, like images. Some of the headers are so obvious that you're just like, oh, I totally can scrape for that. And then once you do it, it's amazing the things that you find. Another great service you should check out if you don't know on the Safari Zone tip is Shodan.io. It's the search engine of the IoT. It's the Internet of Things, but it's every kind of server that's on the internet and every port that's open. Not every, obviously, but a ton gets scanned all the time by Shodan. And they keep records of ones that show up and disappear too and stuff like that. Once you have a key for them too, it really unlocks a lot more to that service, and you really can get in there and find some cool stuff. And like I said, I'm a cam hunter, and it's really easy to try and fingerprint a camera's like default headers and default credentials and the ports that it wants to be on, and the kind of like protocols that it uses and stuff like that. And I've just sort of gotten into that zone where it's just like I find a new camera model that I find just on the internet randomly, and I'm like, okay, let's see how many of those other kinds of that camera I can find on the internet. And then you just start peeking, and you can't believe you find like, here's a hotel, or here's a beauty salon. Some of the cameras are on there on purpose, like the Big Oli cam, which I'll link below, one of my all-time favorites that I found randomly on Safari, but it's like a public camera that's just broadcasted on the internet. But I found it through Shodan. I thought I was so cool. But that's what's rad about the Safari Zone. When you're on the hunt and you find something, you think it's so rad, you get that sense of like, oh my god, I did it, I found something cool. So yeah, keep those eyes open. You won't believe the things that you find if you look. So that's my advice for tonight. So I hope you've enjoyed this vlog. Why don't you click the like, subscribe, bell, comment, tell me what you want me to talk about next. All right, later.